Hey, Ninger Beaner, how are you? Hey, Princess, how are you? Hey, Miss Surly, how you doing, sister? How's it going? No, do any music or not? Can y'all hear me okay? Hey, Vincy Lou Who, how are you? See if I can put some music on without it crashing. No, that's not where I want to go. I had to go in the office today, and I had a chiropractor appointment today, so yeah.
Power on. Connected.
When the night. We're going to listen to some oldies tonight. The name of this book is Dreams of You, and I automatically went, my mind went back to the oldies, like Dream a Little Dream, those kind of songs. All right, y'all ready? All right. So this is Dreams of You. It's book 1 in the Dreams Trilogy, and it's chapter 1. Y'all ready? Linen. Can y'all hear me okay? Is the music too loud? I'll look back up here in a minute. Put my contacts in today, so I got my readers on. My Dollar Tree readers. Okay. I leaned a hip against the counter in the break room and sighed as the coffee trickled into the pot. I was exhausted and ready to be home in my pajamas, whatever way you want to say it. My daddy always said pajamas. My mama always said pajamas. I was raised in the South, so I usually go pajamas. Every now and then I'll say pajamas just because. Unfortunately, the segment I'd spent the last week researching had taken a hard left a few hours before. I couldn't leave until it was adjusted and ready to air in the morning, even if that meant pulling an all-nighter. Caffeine and fuzzy slippers would have to be my saving grace for the next few hours. Finding the biggest mug on the shelf, I tapped a short, chipped and chewed fingernail against it, silently glaring at the ancient bun, willing it to hurry. I wasn't sure why the powers that be had never replaced the machine that was older than I was, especially in an office where everyone seemed to exist solely on coffee. But I didn't have time to be picky. There was too much to do. That got a little loud, didn't it? It should have gone back to my office, and I should have gone back to my office and worked while I waited. But I knew from experience that I'd get absorbed in the story and lose track of time. Hey, y'all. Once you learn how to spell y'all? I couldn't count how many times the damn pot had grown cold by the time I'd remembered it. This was definitely a hot and fresh kind of night. With an impatient sigh, I let my eyes linger on the clock. Most of my friends were home getting their families ready for bed. The rest were meeting for cocktails and dinner at their favorite pub before going dancing at one of the many clubs that they frequented. Even if I weren't stuck at work, I'd be the boring one bailing for the privacy of my apartment. I spent another night cuddled in my pajamas on the couch, eating takeout straight from the container, while the first few sessions of One Tree Hill back when Lucas and Peyton made me believe young love could survive the test of time, streamed on a loop. Better than the alternative, I reminded myself harshly. My Friday nights could be spent tucked into the ancient, stained, overstuffed chair in the corner of my bedroom, wearing a ratty, too big tee that smelled like desperation and broken dreams, watching the latest comic book superhero franchise made movie, praying my phone would ring, and then crying myself to sleep when it didn't. Oddly specific, I know. It hadn't been my finest hour. Okay, so it'd been more like a month. A dark time Dylan and I never spoke of. As if on cue, the obnoxious ringtone I'd programmed for my best friend broke the silence, startling me. I normally let personal calls go to voicemail. If it had been anyone else, I might have. Dylan never called me on my work phone. I could practically see the bat signal flashing across the sky. Forgetting the coffee, I ran from my office on the other side of the building, dodging desks and a pile of files someone had left on the floor. I grabbed it just in time, slightly out of breath, and frowned as I lifted it to my ear. "What's wrong?" she scoffed. Why does there have to be something wrong? Because I can count on one hand the number of times you've called me since we got cell phones, I retorted with a laugh. All of them emergencies, and you never use this number. I was the one who usually initiated verbal contact between us. Yes, we'd been typical teens. Some nights the two of us had spent hours on the phone giggling and gushing over whatever had been exciting in our lives. However, if it were up to Dylan, we'd only talk via text now. Some of those conversations would be conducted entirely in emojis and GIFs. She was that girl. I could be that girl. The line was silent for a moment. "Good point," she snorted. "What are you doing tonight, beautiful?" Relief that she seemed fine, that there was no life-altering crisis, flooded through me as I dropped into my worn-out chair and spun toward the window, gazing out over my beloved city. "Sitting in an ivory tower watching a chaotic kingdom," I sassed. "So you are still at work." Bracing for the disapproval I had no doubt was coming, I wrinkled my nose. Dylan loved her job as a physical therapist assistant. But at the end of her shift, she went home and put the day behind her. She'd struggled for years to understand why I spent more time in the office than I did at home, and why a 40-hour work week wasn't in my vocabulary. I am, and yes, I know it's a Friday night. She didn't criticize. "You're not alone, are you?" The lack of a lecture threw me, yet it was the way she asked that made the hair on my arms rise. Maybe she'd finally taken her concern about my work ethic to another level. However, if I'd learned anything after over 2.5 decades of friendship, it was never to underestimate her. Dylan always had a reason. Suddenly uncomfortable, I frowned and turned back toward the newsroom. My uneasiness immediately melted away as I looked through the glass walls of my office over the sea of desks. There were no dividers or cubicles because the powers that be believed in open space design fostered collaboration between all team members, no matter what their official title. Most days, I thought the lack of privacy was a pain in the ass. But at night, it was nice because I was able to see who had gone home and which dedicated souls were burning the midnight oil. The migraine inducing overhead fluorescents had thankfully been turned off hours before, but 5 or 6 desk lamps dotted the room like stars in the night sky. There are a few people still here. Even if I was alone, I wouldn't really be by myself. We have 24-hour security downstairs, and you need a badge to access this floor. I didn't know if I was assuring her or myself. What about Penny? Have you seen her? I tried to call her earlier, but it went straight to voicemail. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. I'd never understood Dylan's friendship with the lifestyle producer. Yes, Penelope Young was as incredibly sweet and kind as she was smart and articulate. Vincey, did you mute Nathan again? We get a hi, y'all, and that's all we got. It was her love of celebrity gossip, which she passed as cold, hard fact, that irritated me. Someone as talented as Penny shouldn't waste energy worrying about the lifestyle of the rich and famous. Yet, she was in her element when she put together a story on something as senseless as the latest Hollywood buzz. I quickly scanned the glass-lined offices that, like mine, created a perimeter around the newsroom. No, the rest of the producers are gone, even Penny, I confirmed as my eyes narrowed. Are you going to tell me what's going on? I can put on my investigative reporter hat if I need to. Just know that I can be brutally intrusive. Dylan's laugh sounded forced. I'm coming to rescue you, that's what. Dinner and drinks on me. I miss your face. I need time with my bestie. You know, I'd love that, but it's a really bad time right now. I can't. You can. She ignored my attempted excuse, talking over me instead. I'll even make a pit stop at Starbucks on Beacon. They're open late. That way you'll be energized when you go back to work. I mean, if you even get to go back that late. Something was off. Dylan barely tolerated my coffee addiction. She only indulged in my love of caffeine when something was so wrong that she either wanted to distract me or needed to a distraction for herself. I'll put a new nose ring in. My towel grabbed mine yesterday. Nathan's MIA, y'all. The aliens came and got him. My time is too expensive, and I'm not your reward. Something was off. Dylan barely tolerated my coffee addiction. She only indulged in my love of caffeine when something was so wrong that she either wanted to distract me or needed a distraction for herself. Okay, I kept cautiously. Not because cold brew was my obsession. It was. But because I wanted answers. I stood, pulled my wallet and keys from their hiding space on the crown bookshelf, and glanced around to see if I'd forgotten anything. Want me to meet you somewhere? No, I'm already on the block. Be outside in 5. I glanced up as the elevator doors opened across the room and Penelope hurried onto the floor. Hey, I muttered into the phone, amazed my coworker was perfect timing. Penny is here. Want me to ask her to join us? Penny is there? Like right now? The panic in Dylan's voice made me grip the phone tighter. The petite brunette spotted me, waved frantically, and headed my way. Yep, right now. She's coming over. Am I inviting her or not? My voice dropped to a whisper. Either way, you're going to tell me what the hell is wrong. Screeching her hurried steps to a halt outside my office, Penelope slapped her hands on the glass on either side of my door and leaned into the room. Her eyes were wide and sparkling, delight mixed with irritation all over her beautiful face, and she was practically vibrating with excitement. I knew before she uttered a word that something important had happened in Hollywood. I couldn't tell if it was good or bad, but it had to be big news. Nothing else would elicit that kind of reaction from her. Trepidation washed over me. If she'd come back to the office on a Friday night, it was to produce a segment for the morning. That meant my story, the one that would actually impact and possibly change lives, wouldn't air the next day. Probably not until much later. Lord knew I'd been bumped enough times that I should just expect it. Even though I'd have some extra time to clean it up now and wouldn't have to pull an all-nighter, I felt like a balloon that had just been poked with a pin. I was at dinner when the story broke. WHDH, she sneered our competitor's call sign. Beat us to it. Again! She kept talking as Dylan started to yell. Lennon, are you listening to me? Lynn? I shook my head as if they could both see me. I was too tired to deal with whatever in the hell was going on in Penny's world. Disappointment burning a bitter path through my veins. What's wrong? I didn't know who I was addressing. Maybe both of them. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't do a Penny voice, did I? Okay. I was at dinner when the story broke. WHDH, she sneered at our competitor's call sign. Beat us to it. Again. She kept talking as Dylan started to yell. Lennon, are you listening to me? Lynn? What's wrong? Cullen James got engaged an hour ago. Penelope announced excitedly, sinking her teeth into her bottom lip, as if she were the lucky girl I knew you would, Vincey, who'd landed Hollywood's golden boy. Clapping, she hopped into the air twice like a deranged bunny. I didn't know if I was trying to process the words she'd uttered or horrified by the announcement, but I stood frozen, my mouth open. Without warning, Penny seemed to remember she wasn't supposed to be happy, and her face turned dark. Throwing her arms into the air in dramatic disgust, she growled. An actual growl. One that would come from a scared feral animal, not a perky little pixie. Once again, we're late breaking the news. I rushed over as soon as I heard and called in the rest of my team on the way, but we're still late. Damn it! Her eyes flicked to the watch on her wrist. They should be here any minute. Is there coffee? I should have Garrett grab some just in case. We need to post an announcement online and prep a segment for the morning. I have to call out to New York to see if we have a quote from their reps. But Penny continued to ramble as she headed for her own office, almost like I'd never been there at all. It didn't matter because I hadn't really paid attention to another word she had uttered after she'd made her announcement. On the other end of the line, Dylan was still talking, her voice full of reassurance. You know how the tabloids are. They'll say anything to make a buck. This isn't a big deal. Yes, there are pictures online, but pictures don't always tell the real story. Lynn, this is Cullen we're talking about. Our Cullen. He's made some pretty fucked up choices, but he wouldn't do this. Her words tugged me out of the fog. She was right. It was Cullen. I didn't have her confidence. I didn't know what to expect from him anymore. That's what scared me the most. He was no longer the boy I'd once known. I meant to mutter a goodbye before I ended the call, but I wasn't sure it came out. I dropped my phone and grabbed my laptop. Without sitting, I typed his name into my favorite search engine. The results popped up immediately. Photos of Cullen and his current rumored love interest lined the top of the page, but it was the headlines that jumped out at me. Cullen James and Briar Bennett engaged at last? Where there's smoke, there's an engagement ring, and Cullen and Briar are on fire. He put a ring on it. Cullen James, Briar Bennett, finally tying the knot. I rolled my eyes at the article titles. Clearly, no one had taken the time to think of something halfway decent, too concerned with being the first to break the news. Journalism at its finest, folks. I clicked on one, then the next, ignoring how pathetic they were, desperate to see the proof. The pictures weren't new. In fact, most of them I'd seen so many times I could describe each in great detail. I opened the videos tab. The headlines were more the same, all stating that the man of the hour, the untamable playboy, was finally ready to settle down, with America's pop princess no less. I scrolled through them past the entertainment magazines and basement blogs to the actual news channels. ABC, NBC, and CBS all had posts, which meant their local Boston affiliates had, in fact, beaten us to the punch. At that moment, I didn't care about the ratings, rivalries, or who bested who. The only thought in my mind was that there were credible stations with producers too afraid of lawsuits and their reputation to print something without fact checking. I clicked on the first one, mentally bracing myself for a truth I might not want to face. The anchor, a young woman with straight, pearly whites and the perfect amount of bronzer, smiled at the camera. Up next, congratulations are in order, this time for Cullen James and Briar Bennett. She faded from view but continued the story in a voiceover as the slideshow began. The couple we all fell for in Dangerous Night had been rumored to be dating on and off for almost a year, but it was only last month that Bennett took to Instagram to confirm. A picture of the two of them grinning, Cullen's arm around Briar, holding her tightly as they sat in the audience at an awards show, dominated the screen as Briar's post was highlighted beneath. I love this guy so much, I just can't stand it. He's the only one who can make me smile this big. The reporter read for those who might not be able to see the giant words that still, 3 weeks later, made me sick to my stomach. Now it appears the couple has taken their love to the next level. Earlier today, as they were spotted leaving Crustacean, the trendy Hollywood restaurant, Bennett was photographed wearing a large diamond and sapphire ring on her left hand, leading many to speculate that the Academy Award winner popped the question during a romantic lunch. Pictures flashed across the screen showing Cullen gazing down at Briar with an adoration on his face. When they zoomed in, a diamond that looked suspiciously like an engagement ring sparkled on her left hand. I swallowed hard. Then again, desperate to clear the lump lodged in my throat. When asked for a comment, reps for both responded with a joint statement saying, Cullen and Briar have found happiness. When they're ready to share what they share that with when they're ready to share that with their fans, they will. So there you have it, folks. Sometimes fairy tales do come true. Our congratulations go out to them. The clip ended for a moment. The clip ended. For a moment, I stared at my screen. One small piece of me began to plant seeds of hope in the back of my mind. Maybe it's a publicity stunt. Maybe the ring was a present that wouldn't fit any other finger. Maybe it isn't what it appeared to be. Maybe there's a perfectly acceptable explanation. There wasn't. I wasn't stupid. Although I'd never felt more foolish. The truth swept over me like a bitter January wind. I slammed the laptop shut with the one hand as the other attempted to rub away the throbbing in my temple. The worst part was that I'd known something was wrong. My intuition had become so overwhelming a few weeks before that I'd woken up in the middle of the night in a panic, with tears in my eyes before I could stop myself. I dialed his number because I needed to hear his voice. Dean Cullen had been such a huge part of my life for so long that we'd become connected in a way I couldn't describe without sounding certifiable. I couldn't have explained what, but I'd felt that something big was looming around the corner. That whatever it was, it definitely was not good. Half of me had expected bad news to be delivered every day since, while the other half wondered if I'd open my door one night to find him sitting in his chair waiting for me to come home. What I hadn't anticipated was this news, or finding out this way. Anger pulsed through my veins. I was pissed at myself for being such an idiot for so long, yet I was infuriated with Dean because he hadn't had the balls to pick up the phone and tell me himself. Screw him. He wasn't going to get off the hook that easily. If he was ready to move on, if he wanted out, he had to say the damn words. He owed me an explanation. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for him to break me. I'd waited on him long enough. I snatched my cell phone and dialed the number I knew as well as my own. I took a deep breath as his phone started to ring. It was all an act. The strong, adamant, yet bitter woman I'd become. This woman he'd come to know. Inside, I was trembling. There, deep within the safety of my walls, was the girl who loved him with every ounce of her being. She needed him to lie. She wasn't ready for the truth. She wouldn't believe anything he said, no matter how crazy his story was, and cling to it like it was her only lifeline because she wasn't ready to let go. I didn't know which version of me would appear when he answered. After the second ring, I half expected him not to pick up, to send me to voicemail. He was no doubt celebrating his joyous news with his fiance. My fingers gripped the phone tightly. When Joan's voice greeted me, acid pooled in my stomach, and I clenched my teeth. Of course, he'd have her do his dirty work. Nothing surprised me anymore. The only words I could manage were harsh and forced. Bitter and angry it was then. Put my husband on the phone. Did y'all see that coming? I sure as hell didn't. Should I stop there? Let's see what Dean's got to say for himself. Dean. The damn phone had buzzed nonstop since we'd gotten into the town car. I didn't keep track of who'd called, letting my manager deal with the nosy pricks instead. Normally, she loved when my name was on everyone's lips, the way shutterbug stalkers fought each other for the best candidates, like seagulls fighting for scraps. Today was a different beast altogether. She'd earned every penny of the outrageous salary I paid. For anyone who didn't know her, the sickly sweet tone Joan had used all afternoon sounded over exaggerated, like she'd spent too much time in Los Angeles. Those of us in her inner circle recognized it for what it was. She was so infuriated that steam was about to billow out of her ears. Losing her shit was a real possibility, and it would take only the smallest spark before she blew. I pitied the poor, unfortunate soul on the other end of the call when that happened. If people would just mind their own fucking business, it wouldn't be an issue. Not that anyone in this damn industry could manage that. When the cell vibrated again, her deep sigh echoed around the car, as if bracing herself for whomever was on the other end of the line. As Joan cleared her throat and adjusted in her seat, she reminded me of a general ready in for war. I didn't know who was calling, but it was obvious that she dreaded answering as much as I feared talking to my social media manager. My lips quirked in amused relief as I watched the traffic out my window. At least she was as miserable as I was. This was her fault after all. Let's see. Let's do a good manager voice. Lennon, darling. Is that a good one? That's not a good one. Lennon, darling. Joan drawled in a greeting. My head snapped toward her as my breath caught and everything else faded away. Joan's eyes narrowed on me in a glare that would stop the most ruthless and dangerous in their tracks. Words failed me, but I gave a subtle shake of my head to let her know I wouldn't take the call. Not now. Joan's nostrils flared in fury. I ignored her. There was nothing she could say or do that would make me talk to Lennon in that moment. I glanced at my watch and did the calculation without a second thought. It was a little past 9 on the East Coast. There were only 2 reasons Lynn would call me on a Friday night. Since it was too early for a drunk dial, I knew she'd heard the news. I swallowed and rubbed my suddenly sweaty palms on designer denim as I tried to force myself to relax. That was not a conversation I was going to have in front of anyone, especially not the women in the car with me. No, I needed to be home, a bottle of scotch in my hand, mentally prepared to brave the force that was Lynn and James. Beside me, Briar went rigid. For a few heartbeats, I wasn't sure she even breathed. Slowly, her hand covered mine. News travels fast. With a small nod, I pulled my eyes from Joan to focus on the breathtaking blonde next to me. When her gaze met mine, Brian offered a small, apologetic smile, but there was no joy on her face. I'm sorry. Don't be. Without thinking, I lifted a hand to brush a loose curl behind her ear, an attempt to ease her worry and distract myself. But she batted me away. Idiot. I knew Briar hated when I played with her hair. She thought it was juvenile and pathetic, but old habits died hard. Some actions were second nature, and my body reacted before my mind remembered. Instead of calling me out or slapping the sense back into my pathetic ass, Briar leaned toward me, her mouth next to my ear. You should talk to her. Her voice was little more than a murmur, as if afraid Lynn could hear. Surprised, my lips twisted in disgust. Why? The scoff came out much harsher than I'd intended, but I refused to backtrack. Because rejection hurts, even when you lose to someone like me. That's what's going through her mind. She could probably use a friend right now, maybe even an explanation. Briar Bennett was one of the most important people in my life. I didn't know where I'd be without her, and not because our chemistry set the silver screen on fire and sent everyone's imaginations into overdrive. But Lennon was off limits. I didn't want to hear anyone's opinions of her. Ever. There were many things I wanted to say. I bit back the snarl, but just barely. Instead, I nodded. I'll call her later. Briar's eyes closed as she let loose a long sigh laced with disappointment that reminded me of my mother. I didn't know if she was upset with me, the situation, or both. However, I did know that Briar wasn't talented enough to hide her exasperation. When she opened them again, they were cold, her jaw tight. When your wife calls, you take the damn call. I smirked cruelly before I could stop myself. Is that concern for Lennon I hear, or are you worried I'll start to dodge yours next? Briar's eyes widened in agitation at my words. She crossed her arms over her chest, tipped her head slightly, and arched a single brow. All signs that meant Briar had reached her limit. Good. So had I. I'd set clear boundaries around Lynn. I wasn't backing down for anyone. I know the people and laws in New England tend to run a little slower than the rest of the country, but bigamy is still illegal in all 50 states. I took a deep breath and counted to 10. This, whatever this was going to get ugly if I didn't stop it. After everything that had already happened, a war with each other was the last thing we needed. Outwardly, I mimicked her expression, but the corners of my lips curled up, feigning amusement at her behavior. She may have hurled the insult and expected a direct hit, but I refused to show that she affected me at all. She could rage with the best of them, but I didn't have to play into it, no matter how infuriated I was. I was that good at my job. There might not be cameras aimed at us, but this was just... Are you on a time delay, Nina? No matter how infuriated I was that good at my job. There might not be cameras aimed at us, but this was just another role. I'd been playing it for so long, it was second nature. When the reaction she had hoped for never came, she rolled her eyes. She deserves the truth, Cullen. Truth. I almost laughed. The truth was all about angles, how a person looked at something. We could be standing side by side watching the same event unfold, yet our versions would be different. Didn't mean that either of us was lying. We simply hadn't seen it the same way. Stop being so cruel. Take the damn phone and put her out of her misery. Briar's voice was much louder than moments before. The car was almost silent. Too late, I realized that Joan had stopped talking, even though the phone was still pressed to her ear. I didn't know what Lennon had heard, but from the look on my manager's face, it wasn't good. Regret had become my constant companion. It weighed heavier on my shoulders in that moment than it had the rest of my life. I couldn't simply take the phone and talk to Lennon, even if I'd give her dime, even if I'd give every dime to hear her voice. There was too much history between us. No one understood. They couldn't because they hadn't been part of it. Hell, I'd had a starring role and I still didn't grasp the enormity of it all. I turned my attention to the world outside the car and let myself remember. Chapter 2, Lennon, the Past. I couldn't breathe. Dylan, the sadistic brat I'd once foolishly labeled best friend, typically found pleasure in making me giggle until I peed my pants. Today was worse. She was trying to kill me as she recalled her night out shopping with her mom. Fat tears rolled down my cheeks that burned red in embarrassment. I started to wheeze, and my sides hurt from laughing at her crazy stories. That didn't stop my best friend, though. Oh, no, she had no mercy. Oh, my God. Did I tell you about the guy on the bike? Dylan didn't give me a moment. Boy, did y'all hear that country southern twang come out in that? She leaned forward on the Chase Lounge, face pinched in concentration. When he pulled up next to us at the red light, I looked over because, hello, hot guy in tight shorts, you know? Some of those guys have muscles for days, and those shorts show everything. She paused, smirking as I shook my head. Nothing she said shocked me anymore, no matter how much she tried. So he stops next to us, balances for a few seconds, looks over and sees my mom watching him. He smiled at her, lifted his chin all flirty and shit, pulled off his sunglasses and went to put his foot down, totally hitting on her. Apparently, he'd forgotten he was wearing those hideous shoes that clipped to the pedals or whatever, so he couldn't actually get his foot loose. For a second or two, he struggled. Then the dude just toppled over, like his entire bike fell onto the grass. At the same second, the light turned green. Tears burned my eyes as my shoulders shook. I could picture it. What happened then? Did you stop to help? She shrugged. You know my mom. She gave him a little finger wave and drove off. I couldn't stop the obnoxious giggle. It was totally something Aunt Tasha would do. Not only was my mom's best friend a hoot, but she and Dylan always had the funniest, most random things happen to them. What's so funny? I choked on my laughter as Dylan's brother stepped onto the patio and closed the slider behind him. Back muscles bunched under his Henley as he moved and his lips curled up in a knowing smile that made him even more attractive if possible. As he turned toward us, I tried to ignore the fact that everything about him dissolved my insides into mush. I felt Dylan's eyes on me in that silent, watchful way of hers, but I refused to meet her stare. Instead, I turned around, pretending I hadn't checked out Dean, and focused on the neighbor's backyard as Dylan answered him. It was a harmless little crush. That was it. Nothing to see here, folks. Move along. Only it wasn't little anymore. If I continued to let it fester or give it too much attention, it could be detrimental. When I was 5 or 6, I'd woken up screaming, sheets and PJs soaking wet from sweat, shaking in fear. The nightmare seemed so lifelike that I refused to believe it wasn't real. I stayed awake for days straight to avoid sleep. Worried my parents had taken me to the doctor. Worried my parents had taken me to the doctor. He prescribed medication to help me relax and trick my mind into rest. The diagnosis wasn't anything exciting, a sleep disorder I'd eventually outgrow. Only I hadn't. As I got older, I started paying attention to the dreams, determined to figure out what my subconscious was trying to tell me, convinced each held an important buried message. At some point around fourth grade, I'd convinced myself I could see the future. I wasn't clairvoyant. Unfortunately, I hadn't been born a seer or a witch doctor or an oracle. I wasn't trapped in a fantasy realm where I was sent to fulfill a prophecy and save the world, as disappointing as that truth was to accept for a geek like me. In reality, I fixated on the details of each dream, obsessing over them over a Freudian level, and inevitably some came true. Like the time I crashed my bike because I was watching for a hungry-eyed wolf to attack from the woods. Dream Linen had survived the random attack, but had ended up with her right arm in a sling, bandaged after she had been mauled. Real me got a cast after breaking my arm in 3 places because I hadn't paid attention to what was in front of me. Not all the dreams were bad. Sometimes fantastic things happened to me. 7th grade, I dreamed the new kid kissed me at a dance. I'd gotten up the next morning infatuated with him. We did kiss at the dance, but only because I'd made it my life's mission to find out everything I could about Seth from South Carolina and made sure he'd notice me. Seth. I hadn't talked to him in months. I made a mental note to message him as soon as I got home. The dreams weren't a superpower, but they did mess with my head. When I'd woken up a few months before drenched in a cold sweat, I sat on my bed, shaking my head at the craziest dream I'd ever had. There was no way Dean would fall in love with me, and there wasn't a chance the two of us would ever spend the night together in the back of his truck. He didn't even own a truck, for goodness sake. The entire thing was pure insanity. Laughable, really. However, I could still see us, clear as day, every time I let myself remember. If I didn't stop myself, I could almost feel his fingertips on my skin. No letting my mind go there. My sudden attraction to him shouldn't have been a surprise, not after that dream. Although I did wonder if he'd become hotter overnight or if it was all because of the stupid dream. Whatever the reason, I planned to ignore his beauty and my attraction to it. I'd lose interest eventually. Someone cuter, funnier, and even more perfect would catch my eye and haunt my dreams. Although I was pretty sure the mold hadn't broken with Dean. There wasn't anyone more attractive, as hilarious, or as perfect for me. It didn't matter. Best friends didn't perv on their best friend's big brother. It was against girl code, especially when said friends had been besties since they could talk and that big brother had seen me naked. It wasn't as scandalous as it sounded. We'd gotten carried away playing in the backyard, covered from head to toe in thick mud. Disgusted, our moms had stripped the 3 of us and plopped us in a bathtub overflowing with bubbles. Even though he'd been naked too, I didn't remember anything. Actually, it wasn't just the 3 of us now that I thought about it. Tate had been there too. 3-year-old me saw a hell of a lot more action than 15-year-old me. I was relatively sure my mom had photographed evidence of said bath. Oh, look, Nathan's back. Vincent let him out of jail. I was relatively sure my mom had photographic evidence of said bath. I needed to find it and destroy it. If Dean or Tate saw it, I'd die from embarrassment. That wasn't the only suggestive picture from when we were young. My favorite photo from childhood was glued to the cover of my notebook and went everywhere with me. In it, a very young Dean sat on the couch with an even younger me. He'd just given me his lollipop. In exchange, I'd kissed him. No one stopped me. They all knew I adored him. Instead, someone had snapped a picture forever capturing the sweet moment between 2 innocents. Our families were great like that. The biggest barrier of all was probably the saddest. I wasn't sure Dean realized we weren't actually related. Most people thought we were. Earth to linen, Dean teased as he pushed my feet aside and sat on the end of the chase. I gave him a small smile as my heart started to beat the rhythm of doom against my ribcage. Sorry, lost in thought. His grin lit up his handsome face as he teased. Why am I not surprised? I shrugged. It was a side effect of being an only child. Sometimes the only person you had to talk to was yourself, so you got comfortable with your thoughts. How was rehearsal? It was Dean's turn to lift his shoulders as his brow furrowed. I think it went okay. Just okay, I prodded. The show's director was new to the organization, and according to Dean, a total hard ass. The cast had been struggling for weeks now. He sighed. We're not amateurs. It's not like we don't know our lines or how to do our jobs, but he keeps changing the blocking and cues, which screws everything up and makes half the cast nervous, so they mess up their lines. His grin was so cocky it was adorable. You don't have a clue what I'm talking about, do you? Not really, but I don't need to know to listen. Community theater was not my idea of a good time, but he loved it. 6 years before, Dean had become the youngest actor ever cast. He'd gotten a role in every performance since. The annual show ran for 2 weeks to a sold out house every night. I'd listen to whatever he had to say, and not because of the recent dream. It was our thing. I didn't know anything about soccer or relationships either, but I was an ear when he needed to vent about anything in his life. Just like he was mine. I'd tell him about whatever social cause had piqued my interest, the latest issue I was having on the student paper, and the normal woes of being a teen with overbearing parents. Neither of us knew everything, but we could always count on the other to offer advice or support. We were friends. It was what we did. It's pouring down rain. I thought it looked like it was going to rain outside. He reached out and tugged on a piece of my hair before he tucked it behind my ear. Thanks for that. His eyes grew wide and he cleared his throat as he leaned away from me and looked around the backyard. What are you guys doing out here? Aren't you freezing? His words reminded me of how cold I was, and I rubbed my hands together before absent-mindedly glancing at the neighbor's house again. The reason Dylan had dragged me out on a cool New England spring day had nothing to do with the sunshine that had finally graced us with its presence, and everything to do with the shirtless boy working out next door. Out of my peripheral, I saw Dean twist and follow my gaze. Seriously? His annoyed tone almost made me laugh as he spun back towards his sister. Tell me you're not. What? Dylan answered innocently as she intently inspected her nails. Um, it's gorgeous outside. You talking about the weather or my best friend? Dylan groaned, annoyed. Whatever, you know Tate's hot. For a moment, Dean watched his little sister with a blank face. His eyes shifted to me, lips quirking. Tate's hot? I wasn't sure if it was a real question or if he merely trying to make his sister uncomfortable. I swallowed a laugh. A legend in his own mind. Dean's focus on me was so intense I almost squirmed. Then he winked. Before either of us could stop him, he cupped his hands around his mouth. Yo, Griffin, you got peepers over here, man. Might want to cover up. Dean Fitzgerald Cullen, Dylan admonished with a harsh whisper, her mouth falling open in shock. You are an asshole. Dean only laughed, eyes sparkling in pure glee. Next door, Tate Griffin, arguably the hottest boy in school, as long as you asked Dylan or one of the other many admirers, turned toward us and raised a hand in greeting. Abandoning the weights, he grabbed a towel, wiped the sweat from his chiseled body in a way that would make even my grandmother's mouth water, and started our way. Hey, hey, he called as his long legs ate the distance between the two houses. Once, years before, a flower garden separated the properties. We tried to be careful when we ran between the homes, but we'd ruined Aunt Tasha's beloved gladiolus so many times that Uncle Chad had finally stepped in and built her a raised bed at the back of the yard. Now the only border was crushed rock decorated with kitschy gnomes. Tate leaped onto the deck, bumped fists with Dean, lifted an empty wooden chair as if it weighed nothing, and dropped in the space between Dylan and me. Ladies, he greeted with a lift of his chin as he fell onto the seat. Enjoying the weather while it lasts. Enjoying the weather while it lasts. I thought it's hard to read while songs like this are on, y'all. Arriba, arriba. Oh, this is the first time it's rained here in a week or better. Probably 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I don't know. It's so dry out there. It's awful. Dean and I stared at Dylan, waiting for her to answer. She was the one who dragged me out here specifically to spy, and she was the one who always had a good cover story on the tip of her tongue. When she didn't respond, her face a disturbing shade of green, I felt bad. I cleared my throat, torn between sending her a dirty look and asking if she was okay. Instead, I smiled up at the too attractive for high school boy, forcing myself to remember that I didn't need to be nervous around him. I'd known him forever. The four of us had once been inseparable and had countless sleepovers. Of course, that was before Tate turned into an athletic god most women couldn't think straight around. Even my mom, who never got flustered over anything. It was mortifying. This was Tate, our Tate. I spent the last few years avoiding him because he seemed larger than life now. Well, until recently when Dylan convinced me to help her stalk him from a distance. Before the town had adored him, we'd been his only friends. Almost instantly, I conjured up an image of an overweight, acne-prone tween laughing so hard at something silly that he'd snorted milk out his nose. Just like that, he was no longer Mr. Popular Jock and simply an old friend who I didn't get to see enough. When I realized Dylan was going to remain silent, I answered, I'm so sick of winter. I need fresh air and beach days. Tate nodded his agreement. We haven't had a beach day in forever. His eyes shifted to Dylan. We should do one this summer. Skip school and have a flashback day. A flashback day? I asked, desperate to cover for my friend who looked like she might throw up. Yeah, he shot a grin my way before looking at Dylan once again. You know, the five of us hanging out like before, sans the old people, of course. Maybe even make a weekend of it. Oh, Dylan breathed loudly. Mm-hmm. Clearly, it wasn't the answer he had expected. With a confused frown etched on his handsome face, Tate turned his attention back to Dean. We still on for tonight? What's tonight? Dylan demanded, what's tonight? Dylan demanded, nosiness overriding her embarrassment. Dean's lips twisted in amusement at her sudden change. It was fun to see Dylan so flustered, but I didn't know if her brother realized why. Sometimes it felt like you couldn't simply hint. You had to put the message on a flashing billboard with a picture of a giant cheeseburger just to get teenage boys to take notice. That's why I was looking for you, Dean explained as he leaned back. Had he been looking for us? I tried to recall what he'd said when he joined us, but I couldn't remember. I had no right to give Dylan shit about the way she acted around Tate. I barely knew my own name when Dean was nearby. You two still going to the movies? Dylan nodded. Yeah. You coming back here after? No. Dylan's voice was full of caution, as if she'd suspected her brother was leading her straight into a trap. Anna's for a bit before we crash in the treehouse. Why? Will you cover for me with the rents? Dylan didn't miss a beat. Absolutely. One of the things I loved the most about the Cullen family was how close Dean and Dylan were. I didn't know what their parents had done differently than so many others, but the two of them didn't hate each other. They never had. Instead, they liked spending time together, even though they agreed about the silliest things. They argued about the silliest things. They never fought in an angry way and always had each other's back. As an only child who had once wanted a house full of brothers and sisters, it made me extremely envious. Thanks. Wait a minute. Dylan lifted a finger as Dean attempted to stand. Why am I covering? Don't you have a date with Vicky tonight? We broke up. Her eyes practically bulged out of her head, her shock unmistakable. When? A few days ago. Seriously? How did I not know? Why in the hell didn't you tell me? No one at school said anything. Does anyone know? Where are you going tonight? Dean took his sister's rapid fire interrogation in stride. Oh, yes, I saw. I really need to listen to this playlist more. Dean took his sister's rapid fire interrogation into stride, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Eastman's party. Dylan sat forward, eyes intense, in hopes of running into her so you can get back together. Fuck no. Dean looked at me sheepishly. Sorry. Before I could laugh it off, it wasn't like I hadn't heard him swear. He pushed himself off our chair. We're done. I'm over it, over her. She won't be there tonight. I'm going to have fun with my friends. Why are we covering then? Why not just tell your parents? Oh, wait a minute. Why are we covering them? Why not just tell your parents? The question was lame, but I was curious. The Cullen siblings rarely kept secrets from each other or their parents. You know how Mom is. If Vicky calls here looking for me, Mom will feel bad and she'll try to help. I don't want her to tell Vicky where I am. Yeah, but if she wanted to see you that much, she could just go to the party. She doesn't. Oh, she doesn't know about it, Tate explained as he stood up. Eastman's parents left this morning on a last-minute weekend getaway. It's going to be hella crazy. He ran a hand through his chestnut hair, yet all the movement did was draw attention to his bare torso. My eyes swept over him. I didn't want to admit I'd noticed, but it was hard not to see how stacked he was. No one would tell her about it. We don't invite kids. He snapped his fingers as if he had had the best idea. Hey, you should bring the sisters, man. Sister, Dean and I corrected at the same time. It didn't matter that I'd gone to school with almost the same group of people since I was 5, and that everyone knew I wasn't biologically a Cullen. Our families had been inseparable for years. Almost everywhere they went, we went, and vice versa. Somewhere along the way, I'd become an extension of Dylan and, in essence, Dean's second little tag-along. I hated it. Whatever. Bring Dylan and Lennon tonight. Tate smirked at me as he popped an eyebrow. Better. They're sophomores, Dean argued. Dude, you just said we didn't invite kids to party with us. Tate snorted. He knew Dean's reasoning was ridiculous. Other 10th grade girls went to their parties. Vicky had been a constant. This is what I sing to Mike. I don't like you, but I love you. I guess I need to wrap this up, don't I? Tate snorted. He knew Dean's reason was ridiculous. Other 10th grade girls went to their parties. Vicky had been a constant when she was Dean's girlfriend. She'd be invited again as soon as they got back together. Given their history, that'd be in about 5 minutes. Kids, Kids? Dylan rolled her eyes and threw a flip-flop at her brother. Irish twins, you ass. We're almost the same age. Dean still thought of Dylan and me like we were 10 instead of only a few months younger than him. It hadn't always bothered me, but the thoughts I had about him lately changed that. I wanted him to see I'd grown up too. Okay, we're going. Oh, wait a minute. I just got like half a page. I just flipped it over and I saw. A long moment of silence passed while Dylan and I held our breath. Dean was the gatekeeper. For us, the only way in was through him. As long as he said no, we'd never get invited. I didn't even know if I wanted to go to a real party, but I definitely wanted to know I could. He finally nodded. Yeah, okay. Pointing at Dylan, who was so excited she started to wiggle in her seat like a puppy, he narrowed his eyes. It'll actually be easier this way. They'll think we're going to the movies together. Tate held out a fist to Dean. Later, he was halfway back to his house. Later, he was halfway back to his house when he turned and started walking backward. For the record, ladies, I knew you were watching. Hope you liked what you saw. Dylan's face flamed. Busted. Dean laughed all the way back into the house. Booyah. All right, that gets you through chapter 2. So go get it. Go read it. Remember, Dreams of You by Carina Adams. It's book 1 of the Dream Trilogy. All right, ladies. Carina, when you watch this, thank you for letting me read it. I greatly appreciate it, and good luck on the sales. Everybody else, just go get the book, okay? Please and thank you. All right, everybody, have a wonderful weekend. I got one more day in the office this week, and I'm done with the office for a week. Oh, and I have a 5-year-old birthday party to go to Saturday. And I'm bringing a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old with me. So the answer to that, buy water guns. All right, folks, have a wonderful day, a wonderful night, and a wonderful day tomorrow, and a wonderful weekend. And I will see you guys next week. Love you and happy reading.